It's not just difficulty with emotions. Another thing people on the spectrum struggle with is called theory of mind, which is the ability to see other people's perspectives and knowing that they have different thoughts and beliefs and desires that are different than your own. Basically, it's a way to read social cues. Learning how to socialize doesn't come naturally to people with Asperger's. We can learn it, like anything else, through practice and repetition, but it's an intellectual process instead of intuitive, which is why socializing is draining. What makes it harder is that people are different. People don't always do what they say or say what they mean, and those inconsistencies can make socializing more challenging.
The pineal gland, the major gland in the brain that deals with light and input and information, the pineal gland of most people on the spectrum is formed differently. And that input, that information, that light, that sensory stuff that we're bringing into the brain is different for people on the spectrum. Another theory that about the brain that I really feel is accurate also is the mirror neurons. And the mirror neurons is fairly new discovery about the brain that in neurotypical people who happen not to be on the spectrum, they're able to track and follow somebody outside of themselves and their experiences empathically while feeling their pain and understanding what somebody else goes through. I'm sitting in the waiting room and there's a lady with a baby, a very young baby, who is very squirming and moving around and leaned forward and hit his head against a railing there and was crying loudly. And there was a man in the waiting room who just jumped up and said, "Oh my," and just got very excited and actually reached his hands out as if he was going to catch the baby, but there was 15 feet difference. That's what mirror neurons would do. It would cause people, neurotypicals, to feel the pain of other people, and in the people who have Asperger's, that's not activated. It's not working, and so we will intellectualize. Baby hits head, baby cries in pain. Oh, that must hurt. And so we had that process, which is it's an intellectual process for us. And so we're thinking about what that might be like instead of just going straight into the feeling aspects. I also like this theory as well. People on the spectrum do not produce oxytocin and to nowhere near to the degree of other people. And I highly suspect I don't produce any oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical, which helps people to bond. It spikes in women who are having children and bearing a child, who then will bond with this child and hold this child and cuddle with this child, and her system is flooded with oxytocin at that time. Or after lovemaking, people would have this wanting to hug and cuddle and feeling, and when you have people who have very low on the oxytocin, it's like, okay, I can feel for you, but I'd like a ham sandwich right now or something. And so without that neurochemical in us, we're not biologically connected to another person in the ways in which neurotypical people are. And I think there's a lot of truth to that one as well.
Another common characteristic is lack of eye contact. This causes some difficulty because you're obviously going to miss social cues if you're not looking at the person's face. One consequence of missing these signals is that people on the spectrum can think very literally.
We're very literal thinkers, and that's so true. We really need for people in our lives, those who surround us, to give us structure. And if we don't have that, we'll do whatever makes sense to us, and that's what draws us into that anxiety, because if it makes sense for me to stay in my pajamas and stay at home and whatever, eat Fig Newtons and get on a computer and play computer games for 7 hours, then that would make sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to the rest of the world. And they're like, where are you at work? We're looking for you. And all these other responsibilities that we have. And so the responsibilities and the components of our lives, it says, okay, we would expect this at 6 and this at 8 and this at 10. And the regimented expectations that we'd have that would structure us, we actually need that to be there so that we're not running off of our own agendas, which we're very, very capable of doing, and we wouldn't realize if we're off track with what everybody else is expecting, because we need other people to tell us that. And sometimes I think it's okay for us on the spectrum to tell people that I need you to let me know what your expectations are, because other people, neurotypicals, know how to blend in and fit in expectations because it's just a skill that you have, and you don't really think about it until you start thinking about autism, because Asperger's, we're not considered that, and we don't have that ability, and so you wouldn't consider that as something that's missing in somebody until you see that, okay, here's the contrast, and you have people who are socializing differently.
People with Asperger's can be very blunt and honest.
Whoa, that's an ugly sweater.
Normally kids learn at about age 8 about white lies and not being rude, but it takes people on the spectrum a little bit longer. A person with Asperger's is always going to be the friend that tells you you have something in your teeth. What you have to consider is that we're not necessarily trying to be rude, we're just honestly trying to help with a problem that we recognized. Even if it's something that's not instantly correctable, like you're fat or you have acne, our unconscious thought process is that we're just trying to make them aware of the problem so then they can do something about it to solve it. So if you're going to tell us we're being rude, fine, but just understand where we're coming from. Other people make subtle gestures about you have something on your face, but those subtle clues will be completely lost to a person with Asperger's.
The majority of people who are diagnosed with Asperger's are above average to above average in intelligence.
I have a very strategic mind. When it comes to figuring out a plan, I can figure one out on the spot. I also have the ability to know very small tidbits of information that people would probably pass off as like not interesting or not necessarily useful, such as there's 64 squares on a checkerboard.
342 chests of tea were dumped into Boston Harbor during the Boston Tea Party.
Power Rangers was banned in New Zealand until 2011, despite the fact that the show was filmed there.
Ontotophobia is a fear that somewhere in the world there's a duck watching you.
I also can solve a Rubik's Cube. I can now solve it within 2 minutes. And I'm also very persistent about starting and finishing an assignment and making it look good. I don't want to have assignments where it's just good. I want it to be great.